Hello, and welcome to this Red Bull seminar. My name is Nathan Winkelstein. I am the Associate Artistic Director of Red Bull Theater in New York City, the unceded ancestral home of the Lenape people. And welcome to this seminar on Molière / Jeffrey Hatcher's The Imaginary Invalid as part of our Red Bull Theater's Revelation reading series. We hope you will join us for our reading of this play, The Imaginary Invalid, starring Annalee Ashford and Marklyn Baker, and directed by our artistic director, Jesse Berger, this coming Monday at the French Institute Alliance Française at 20 East 60th Street in New York City, or from your own living room and across the country watching our live stream. You can get tickets at redbulltheater.com. I am pleased now to welcome our guests. And they are the aforementioned artistic director of Red Bull Theater and director of this play, Jesse Berger. Hi, Jesse.
Hello, Nathan.
And then our wonderful adaptor, playwright extraordinaire, Jeffrey Hatcher. Hi, Jeffrey.
Bonsoir, comment allez-vous?
Bueno. Nope. Bon. Comme ci, comme ça. And then our other guest, the scholar Mirabelle Ordinaire, who also did the literal translation for this, will be joining shortly. Tech problems, welcome to computers, still happening. So she will be joining us hopefully in a little bit as those resolve themselves. Thank you for joining on this Monday evening, you two, in prep for another Monday evening together next week.
Thank you, Nathan. Great to be with you, Jeffrey.
Hello, good to be with you too, Jesse and Nathan.
So let's jump in with kind of the crux of the question, which is this play, why this play, and why we're adapting it and exploring it. And I think that starts with you, Jesse. So can you tell us a little bit about your personal history with this play, where you come from with it, and why you got excited about it, and why you thought it could use the Jeffrey Hatcher treatment?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I will absolument. My French is terrible, but I'll throw out at least one attempt. Absolument. My history with this play is I've seen it once before in a production at the Utah Shakespeare Festival in the late 1980s or early 1990s, I think it was. And I remember finding it absolutely delightful. But I don't remember much in terms of the detail of it, except perhaps the final song. I remember there being this finale. So I'd never seen any other production of it. Oh, no, I just remembered another one. Since you asked me to dig into the recesses of my memory, I saw a lovely production of it that was directed by a colleague of mine, Eleanor Holdridge, who I think you both know. And Eleanor directed a wonderful production of it at the Pearl Theater Company, the late lamented Pearl, when it was on the Lower East Side, and I saw that production. But I remember it fondly as a great comedy, but I hadn't thought about it in many years until the wonderful actor Marklyn Baker invited me to have lunch with him. We've been trying to work together for a number of years since he last appeared at the Red Bull stage in our production of The School for Scandal, directed by Mark Vitor, in a wonderful production. And we've been looking for things to do with him ever since, and he was appreciating that we were looking for things to do together. And he finally said, well, why don't we have lunch and just talk about some ideas of what we might want to do, instead of you always calling me after you've already decided what play you're doing. And so we had talked about different ideas. And this one was the very first one that came out of Mark's mouth. And then we went through a list of about 20 other titles. And Jeffrey was involved in those conversations too, because we'd been asking him to be in plays that Jeffrey had adapted. And so Mark knew we were fans, and he was fans of ours. So this was kind of unusual, actually, in the history for Red Bull anyway, in that it was being really developed in collaboration with a leading actor. And at a certain point, I think it was last June, Mark was sitting at our gala and said, hey, maybe we should just have a reading of The Imaginary Invalid and see how it plays. And Jeff, I think you were there too. If you weren't, I think you were there. Were you there?
At the gala?
I
think I missed this last gala, so I must owe you $250.
No,
it's actually $500. It's actually $500, just to be clear.
Well, I was only going to say for half.
Well, in any case, it was, for those of you who've never been to the running of the Red Bulls, our annual gala is a great mixture of artists and supporters of artists. And Mark was there and chatting, and we said, yeah, let's just have a reading of that play. And so we did gather a group of actors, and I'll tag Jeffrey midway through as we tell the story, because I said, well, we're going to do it, and we'll invite Jeffrey to be there, and we'll schedule it at a time whenever we can be together and gather a group of actors and just hear any translation of the play that we can find that we like and see how it plays. And Jeffrey had the inspired idea that, well, let's find one that's really old and in the public domain. And so I'll just hand off. You could even complete my sentence if you like. Jeffrey found a translation that we meddled with a little bit. We
yes, it was a translation from about 1890. And so it was very professionally done, and I'm sure it was produced, and it was on that Project Gutenberg website where you can find things like that. And, it is ethically kind of important to choose something that's very old, because, then you don't have to worry about copyright. You can say, well, even the translation is in the public domain. So we took that, and I adapted probably 5 or 6 scenes very quickly, just to get a feel for it, stick my toe in the water, that kind of thing. And we'd already decided which characters we were going to cut or combine. And we had the reading, and it gave us enough to run with. Sometimes you could tell when the original stopped and I began, it was kind of like a speed bump would go in. But sometimes not, But, it was a good thing to do, because at the very least, we could look at the structure of it and look at the bones. And I think we all generally felt that it would work out. But, you always want to feel it in the room with the actors. And the fact that this is, kind of instigated by Mark is a really useful thing, because a lot of times you do an adaptation and you don't know who it's going to be. And then you end up, having to fiddle around with it a bit. Here, it's like, well, we always know Mark's going to be in the central role. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing gets built around his talents, etc.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it was, I think Jeffrey's being a little modest, it was a really delightful reading. We gathered a group of 7 or 8 of the best actors in New York and read this, very fast edit of the old translation, and people really were enjoying it. We had a few guests in the room, and we all really laughed a lot and had a great discussion about the why now, sort of about the medical community that we live, the kind of interactions we have on a daily basis through our own healthcare system, through insurance, with copays, with you name it. There's something once we started really working on this, I thought pretty much a day doesn't go by where something doesn't impact me or come into my conversation that's about health, or a doctor, or scheduling an appointment, or you name it, or a family member. And it's not always funny, because you're dealing with matters of life and death sometimes, but oftentimes it is, and I went to, for instance, I went to get my skin checked, my annual dermatologist check to see that I don't have skin cancer. Well, and the doctor noticed that I had this is too much information, I'm putting it on YouTube, on the internet. And the doctor noticed that I had a little wart on my nose. And I said, oh yeah, that's been bothering me up there. I didn't know what it was. She said, oh yeah, it's a little wart. And I said, oh, what can we do about it? And before I'd gotten those words out of my mouth, she had already put on her gloves and sorry, press the button. She had already got her gloves on. She already got whatever the horrible freezing machine is. And she said, here, cover your eye. Okay. And, within a minute or two, I was wart-free, and I was grateful. But it did put me in the mind of this play. I thought, well, how absurd is it that I just walked in off the street and someone, pointed for all intents and purposes, a laser at my nose and shaved a piece of my skin off and said, okay, have a nice day.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I kind of wish that you'd recorded that on video for us.
Yeah. I should have done that on TikTok. We could sell a lot of tickets that way, I hear.
Well, and we're definitely going to cut that clip completely out of context and post it all over social media too. I am pleased to say that our third guest, I'm not a guest apparently, our third guest is here. So I'm happy to bring the wonderful scholar and translator and director, theater pro, Mirabelle on stage. Hi, Mirabelle.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Sorry,
Hello, Mirabelle. Welcome to our merry conversation.
very glad to be here and that my browser finally allowed me to join you guys.
Yes. But you'll be glad to know, Jesse, that she was here to hear the Wart story. So she
I-
got
Oh, good.
I-
I'm so glad you heard the Wart story. Well, but let me pick up because, in terms of the development of the piece, Mirabelle really came in next. We came away from that reading with Mark and Jeff and the other wonderful actors and said, well, okay, now we really think this works. Let's get a new version going and really, since none of us actually read French, we thought it would be a good idea to commission Mirabelle to do a real literal translation for us, and so we did.
Yeah, it was great. It was so much fun for me to translate the play because I've seen it many times. It's a play that is very often done in France, so I've seen it many times. I actually even saw it when I was in high school, and so it's a play that we all know very well. But getting to deep into the text and translating it was just another experience, and it was wonderful.
And Mirabelle, I was wondering actually if you could, and then I'll circle back to some things, but we sort of started at the adaptation. We started at today, but I do wonder, I think it's probably worthwhile to just take a moment and talk about like the original Imaginary Invalid with Molière and all that. Do you know any of the history? Can you tell us any of the history behind this play and when it was like first done and how popular is it compared to other Molière plays, etc.?
Yes, so it was Molière wrote often. He was commissioned by the king to write a lot of his plays, and he usually wrote them with Lully, the composer. This time, Lully and him had a falling out, and so he worked with another composer. And this play, the reason I'm talking about music is this play is there's a lot of music in it. It is really considered to be almost like a comédie ballet, like the Bourgeois Gentilhomme. It's very, music is an integral part of the play. And it was originally supposed to be performed to celebrate the king's victories. And so there is a big prologue that does not feature in the adaptation because it is very, very, anchored in its time. And the prologue is all about celebrating the victories of the king. And then there's the play itself. And so actually, I don't think I've ever seen the prologue performed in my life. It is very often omitted because it is, it's set in ancient, fictional ancient Greece and like shepherds and shepherdesses dancing and celebrating, the king. And it doesn't have much to do with the actual play. All this to say that, so this was why the play was written. The actual play, the Imaginary Invalid was written as a distraction, I guess that's not the right word, but as entertainment, to have the king rest after his battles. However, because Lully was and Molière had a falling out, the play was not performed for the carnival when it was supposed to have been performed, and it didn't get performed at the court as it was supposed to have been. It started in Paris in Molière's theater. And Molière died after the fourth performance. And the legend is that he died on stage. He didn't really die on stage. He had the first, I guess, spasms of agony on stage, and then he died a few hours later at his house. So then the play continued to be performed, and it eventually reached the court about a year and a half later. So it had a weird history, but it also was never published because Molière's wife wanted his troupe to maintain a monopoly of the play, and so she made sure that it did not get published right after Molière died. The first time it was published was way after Molière's death in his first complete works, and that's when it first got its official publication. And it is one of the most famous plays. It was very famous at the time. It is very, very famous in France. It's performed a lot. And the other thing that French people know a lot about is the final scene of the play, which is again not in the adaptation for obvious reasons that you will, which is that Molière invented a language, if you will. In the last scene, I mean, it's an embedded of plays, right? Because you have the prologue in which producers are saying, "Oh, great, let's dance and let's have this play to make everyone feel happy." Then you have the play, and at the end of the play, within the play, they're like, "Let's go and perform a play," right? So we have a third level in which the characters in the play perform this mock ritual doctor initiation. But for this little scene, Molière wrote it in a mock Latin, which is based on the French syntactic language, so that French audiences could understand it. But all the words he added Latin suffixes, if you will, so that when you hear it, you understand what's going on, but you also you understand it just enough that you understand the meaning, but it also sounds like Latin. And he added in words here and there, and it is so funny. I remember, because for French audiences, it's very funny because you, on the one hand, you're hearing this language that doesn't exist, but on the other hand, you understand everything, and it's genius how he did that. And of course, he goes on it, and it's actually very long and protracted, but very, very funny, because he goes on to various stages of how you become a doctor, and then like make sure you don't kill too many people, but enough people, it's quite funny. So anyway, all this to say that the play, for all these reasons, is still very relevant and very funny and performed well in France.
Thank you, Mirabelle. Yeah, and can we, so to then pass it forward to Jeffrey. So Jeffrey, when you're taking a play that is relatively well known, but that obviously does need, in this case, a translation. How do you go about, what is your level of, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. When you are adapting a play, how loyal are you to things like language and syntax and things like that? Or how much do you just focus on structure and original story and then putting your own spin on it?
This is the "how ruthless are you" question.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, first I've got to apologize to Mirabelle, because there's so much that you translated beautifully, and I'd look in the script and kind of, boy, we're not going to use this at all. And it's under that category. I'm sure everybody here understands of, boy, I bet that was hilarious in the 17th century in Paris. And certain things just don't translate. As beautiful as a translation might be, certain ideas don't translate. I remember working on a Feydeau farce many, many years ago, beautifully structured, but there was always one problem character, and in various different translations, the character was rendered as a German woman or Dutch or Spanish. Well, we commissioned a literal translation, and that's where we learned that the character in the original was English. And of course, the jokes didn't work if you were doing an English translation to have a funny English woman, wherein all the jokes were about her personality and the way she tried to speak French. It became one of those conundrums that you just couldn't cut your way out of. But I think it's always advisable to get a literal translation for all sorts of reasons. One, obviously, is the ethics of it all. You want to start fresh, and you want to make sure everybody's being professional about it. But also, literal translation doesn't have the same, I hate to use this word, but responsibility as the final product. The literal translation is to say, what did Molière mean by this word, this phrase, as best as we can approximate it in English in 2024, which is different from the guy, and I'm afraid I've forgotten his name now, who did the translation back in the 1890s. He was already doing a little bit of adaptation, although he kept this on. So I remember I asked Mirabelle, why is this funny? Why is this back and forth between the doctor and Argon funny? Because I don't get it, So I think the important thing is, and she explained why it was funny, but why it may not, have the same oomph for an American audience now. But I think the key thing is you always know in an adaptation that you're going to betray a lot of things. You're going to cut 1,000 things. You're going to alter things. You're going to compress characters. But you've got to stay true to whatever the core idea of the play is. And, either you can take it as a general jumping off point and then write your own play, or you say, all right, I'm going to hit all these notes along the way, structurally try to hit all these notes. And it's going to be a little different, but the feel of each scene will be the same. So, for example, I've only seen it once, and it was a production where you didn't really like Argon. It was the production seemed to criticize him, and I thought, well, Mark Lynn Baker is a really likable person. His persona is likable. So even if he does unlikable things, we still like him. So I thought, well, at base, we should care about this guy and want him to have a quote unquote happy ending. And there are some versions where his relationship with Toinette is, she's very old and he's very young, or he's younger and or vice versa. And we thought, well, maybe this is one where it's a happy ending for everybody, including the two of them. And so you start hewing towards those things. I guess I would argue that as much as I would like this adaptation be done by lots of theaters, but really every theater that wants to do a major adaptation should say, well, what are my needs? What's the need of this theater with this company? And, they should call Mirabelle and start over again. But I always do feel bad that I know a lot of stuff is going to go right out the window. And that is because I am pretty ruthless about that stuff. But I hope, of course, we have no idea what Molière would think. But I hope that there's something in this adaptation that Molière would say, yeah, that feels, if not exactly my play, it feels in the spirit of my play.
Well, I can't speak for Molière, but I have read the various versions in the draft that we're going to go perform on Monday, February 19th at FIAF. And I do think it's really absolutely delightful what you have done and so far, Jeff, with it. And I can't help but think that Molière, first of all, any playwright would be happy to have their work being done 400 years on, let's be honest.
I think there have been adaptations of it where they actually kill off Argon as if he were Molière dying on stage.
Yeah, I read about that. Yeah,
in that weird way that somehow biography trumps drama, and it becomes part of the whole thing.
But then, there's another wonderful play that I'm sure you're familiar with that is Bulgakov's Molière, which tells the story, the last months of Molière's life, and it's a terrific play that I would love for us also to do someday. And that that requires a translation from the Russian, so you've got to get a little. But I agree with you about the commissioning, and we want to do more of it, obviously, at Red Bull. And I think there are a number of other terrific versions of the Imaginary Invalid out there that I read, and they were all created, at least the ones that I came across, they all seem to be created directly for certain moments in time at certain theaters. And so I think that we're in good company there, thinking, well, that one seems like it was really made for this particular company of actors at that particular time. And that a comedy in particular seems to be that seems to just be true of comedy in particular, that it's very hard to bring it up to date or to make it fresh without making it new. As opposed to, Duchess Amalfi, we don't really need a new version of Duchess Amalfi for every acting company.
Well, I'd like to ask Mirabelle a question. I guess it's an ethical question. It's the question of a play that's very well known, a title that's well known, maybe even the plot's well known, versus a play that's not so well known. And is our duty as a translator and adapter to say, well, we should show the audience what it really is if they don't know, but if they know it really well, can we just have a lot of fun with it? I mean, what's your take on that?
I mean, I would say if you say that it's an adaptation, then you're fine, right? I mean, I think in France, it's very clear. Either you do the play and you have the actual title of the play and you say by Molière and everyone expects it to be the play. If you do after Molière, right, d'après Molière, then you leave yourself some room to, do different things. And I think both of them are true. I mean, definitely French audiences would know the play and would expect some things. But if you tell them in advance that you are how close you're going to be to the actual play, then I think people are ready and would enjoy either way. I mean, obviously I don't believe we have the music to that play. So that already is something, that you can work with. Your choice of doing, again, as I said, I'd never seen the prologue, but you could decide to do the prologue. How you deal with the final scene, like all of these musical moments are very, very much open-ended. And so I think already in the play itself, you have room for your own take on it. And so how far you take that, I think, is up to you and the theater and what your project is. I think Molière indeed would be happy to see his play performed. And I also do think that there is something about comedy that needs to be timely, because we all share references. And as you said, some things that probably were hilarious in the 17th century are not. I actually often wonder if I'm sure we laugh at the same times as our ancestors did, but maybe not all, and maybe some things are not funny that they weren't, and vice versa. And so I think making sure that we pinpoint which ones are still working really well and which ones not so much. I'm sure people, when they do this play in France, also do some cuts. I mean, I think it's fine, as long as the spirit of the play is there. I think you're fine. And the other thing that I would say is that Molière, I know, relied a lot on physical comedy. And so that, is something we don't have any record of. How was he moving? How was he going around, pursued by Toinette? What was the kind of, pulling and going back forth, all this running around on stage? We can only imagine how it was. And so again, I think there is room for a lot of that kind of exploration when you do the play, that can easily take it from a quote unquote faithful performance of it to a adaptation. And I think the line is an ever evolving, line, if you will.
Not to put too much of a pun on the French, but I'm reminded that the script of The French Connection, the film from 1970, in the script, when there's the famous chase between Gene Hackman and the subway, it simply says, "There is a chase."
Right.
And it's up to somebody else to figure out what that chase actually is.
Right.
So, we've been joking around that we'll probably have a chase, but we don't know what that is until we're in the room with a bunch of really funny actors and a fight choreographer and Jesse and everybody. It's interesting about did so many Molière plays have as much music as this?
A few of them did. I think it depended. Misanthrope definitely did not. Some of, Tartuffe, I think, did not. But a lot of the comedies did more and more. Bourgeois Gentilhomme is the one that's the most obvious one. It's the how do you say the I don't know.
The bourgeois gentleman, the bourgeois, or the dancing, or the bourgeois.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's the one that's most famous. But a lot of the plays, again, because they were supposed to be performed at court during festivities, included music, and it was most often Lully, the court composer, that would perform the music, and they were part of a huge, 2 or 3 day pageant and fireworks, and it was oftentimes when they were part of that they would have a lot of music when they were written for a different purpose, for themselves, like not for courtly experience, then they would, I would say, have less music, I think.
So here's an interesting thing I think about what we're going to be doing next Monday. So the first time we read it, the play was about 70 minutes long because I cut these big musical things. And then we read it again, kind of entre nous with a bunch of us. And again, 60, 65 minutes. And that's kind of short I think, an audience will be grateful for a 75-minute play, but a 65-minute play, they're kind of like, I want $10 back for my ticket. One of the peculiarities about the reading we're going to do on Monday is we've got a couple of big singers in the show, right? And Jesse can talk about who they are, but the way you're talking about it, Mirabelle, is I'm thinking like, well, there are opportunities that maybe we won't be able to do by Monday. But, whenever we actually do the show, that's like, yeah, there's a 3-minute song here and there's another song there. So we'd be foolish not to avail ourselves of that kind of thing.
Right. I mean,
just make sure, Jeffrey, that there's at least a 10-piece orchestra. That'll be great.
We've got to spin it. We've got a good, expensive spin it.
Right. I mean, Molière did write a scene where the characters were singing, right? So they're communicating to each other by singing, because that's how they can they can pretend that they're singing a piece that actually doesn't exist, and that way they can talk to each other. So
that's the one scene we actually kept, right?
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So already within the structure of the play, music plays an active role into the dramaturgy already, right? So I mean, based on that, I think it's totally fine to extend that in various other places.
Yeah. I completely agree, and of course, Jeffrey's also done a version of the finale that is inspired by Molière's original, but very much in the spirit of this adaptation and Jeffrey's style. I want to ask. May I ask a question, Jeffrey, of you about, because it occurred to me, our first real collaboration was on Gogol's The Government Inspector, which you did a wonderful adaptation of. And I'd forgotten until we were just talking now that one of Gogol's great inspirations was Molière. And he has in journal entries where he talks about, if only I could write as wonderfully as Molière does and explore. I can't remember the exact quote. And I wonder, do you feel a particular connection there as you're working on Molière? Do you see the connection between Gogol and Molière? Do you feel a special affinity to these funny guys?
I feel a connection, but I would guess, at least with this play, perhaps not Tartuffe, perhaps not with the Misanthrope, but in this play, I feel that Molière is kinder to his characters. Gogol is not very kind to his characters. Gogol thinks almost everybody is a fraud, a charlatan, a jerk, a liar. Yeah. And that's where the fun comes from. Right. And that's what also makes it Gogol, so very political. I mean, it's that kind of level of satire it's angry. You can tell there's anger behind the jokes. Mm-hmm. There's some of that, I think, in The Imaginary Invalid, but I don't think Molière hates Argonne. I think he thinks that some of the doctors should out the door. Yeah. But even in, a character we cut, which is the what's it called? The interlocutor, the rationaire.
Yes, the raisonneur, the brother.
Yes.
And even in something in a line that we cut, his brother said, "Well, I'm sure that Dr. Pergon, only has your best interests at heart, but." So there's a level of kindness and gentleness that seems to work through the show in a way that I don't think Gogol would allow himself. And the ugliest stuff in the show isn't even the doctors; it's the second wife and the attorney. That's the nastiest part, and they are quite properly foiled and ejected. Right. But I think that Gogol knew that their similarity had to do with a certain amount of caricature, but again, it comes down to casting Mark says you can't make Mark a caricature that you criticize and then toss to the side. You can criticize him, but kind of like that uncle at Thanksgiving. You want to love him and embrace him, even though you disagree with him. So I think that might be an essential difference. It's almost, not to put too fine a point on the fact that Molière died doing the show. There's a sensitivity and a vulnerability somehow in the show. Whatever you want to say about Argonne, he feels he needs something. And it's either attention, psychological, or it's the embrace of family, it's love, it's something like that. And that's not the sort of thing that I think you'd ever see in Gogol, where somebody needs affection.
I
Right.
think to continue what you're saying, Jeffrey, I think it's very true, because there's, one thing that does feel like here is that, that Argan has become that way because he lost his wife.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
so that seems like the triggering element. And so, it's not dwelt on that much, but it really does feel like it was because he was so sad that his wife died that the second wife was able to prey on him.
Yes.
And the other thing is that I found, very touching is how much his daughter loves him in spite of him going against her wishes, which is rare because in a lot of Molière plays, you have this father-daughter relationship where he goes against him and she wins, and you don't see her loving her father as much. But in this case, in the mock death scene, you could really feel that she's devastated by her father's death, and you're like, if she loves him that much, it must be that there's some good in him, somewhere, and that maybe that we haven't seen, but that there's a lifetime of past goodness and good fatherhood that is there, and so that is definitely something that's redeeming to the character.
I'll jump in that it is something that I have always found very nice about the reading when we heard it, is kind of drawing the parallel of this is a man who's lost a wife to disease, who lost a wife young, and has now become paranoid about his own. It's a very, as laughable as he can be, it's a very understandable turn that has happened to him, which makes you cheer for the people who are cheering for him to figure it out, rather than just be like, he's an idiot. It's like, no, we actually do want him to figure it out, which is not something you see as often in these. Normally that character is just set up to be a fall guy fool. And there's more to him here.
They are archetypes, but I think maybe it's the first archetype of the widower who marries somebody who's on the make. I can't think of one prior to that. Maybe there's something in Ben Jonson, or there's certainly nothing like that in Shakespeare. But if we were to look around today, we all know men and women in their 50s and 60s who've lost a spouse, and somebody marries them and we say, we don't like this guy, or we don't like this woman. They're taking advantage. They can be in their 60s, 70s, 80s. We all know what it is. And Molière nails it, 400 years ago. So it's that kind of archetype that never dies, because, it always happens.
I want to say there's a Greek one, but I may be wrong.
I don't know if there's anyone listening in and they can think of a Greek or a Roman comedy where something like that happens. I'd love to hear it. It's always fun to know the first time that idea walks in the door.
So speaking, you mentioned that there are people here. So first of all, let me just openly ask, this is an open forum. So if you have questions for our panelists, please ask them. And we do have one, which sort of brings us back a little bit to some both translation and adaptation question from Randall Wilkins. So he asks, when translating a rhymed play, do you feel like you want to find a comparable metrical form in English, for example, French Alexandrian to iambic pentameter, or do you just do it in prose? I'm curious about that. And then I'm also curious, as an adapter, what do we do? Do we care that the play was originally in a certain type of structure or form language-wise, and what do we do about that? So can we start with the translation question for Mirabelle?
Yes. It is always an internal question because obviously rhyming lines are different than prose. So you always try to get at least some kind of verse. And of course, the one that comes to mind would be French Alexandrian to iambic pentameter, because they are the most famous, and maybe, I don't know if phrase is the right word, but most famous verses. In this case, the play was written in prose, except when they are singing. So when I translated it, and because also this was a literal translation, I focused more on the meaning to make sure that was what came across. I think a lot of the things that matter to Molière in this particular play is the rhythm. So one thing I made sure was to keep the rhythm the way it was. If the cues were short, the sentences were short, I try to keep that as much as possible. The one thing you can also do, if short of making the verses completely work, is also working on sounds and echoes, because there's a lot of way you can create that sense of verse, even if it's not a perfectly equivalent verse, by having the same sound repeat itself, or just sound echoes that make it very, very constructed in a way that prose wouldn't be. So I think there's various ways in which you can either, rhyme everything, which it's great if that's what you're looking for, or doing a translation that it becomes kind of first by working on those echoes, really in the language. Again, in this case, it was because of what my translation was meant for. I did not go into that at all, and I really focused on the meaning so that Jeffrey would have that to work with, which I thought was what he needed the most.
Yeah, I'm rather certain that if you'd focused specifically on things like rhyme and things like that, it would have eventually worked meaning on occasion.
Exactly, because if it's rhyming or echoes that you're worried about, then you have to go away from. You have to, for sure, leave some part of the meaning aside, or even change the order of things, or you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
So something's got to go, right?
I remember reading a translation of The Misanthrope that Tony Harrison did back in the late 60s. I think it was for the National Theatre, and it was a production that starred Alec McCown and Diana Rigg, and it had these kind of rhymes. The common people stare and jape, but this is the outcome of The Naked Ape, which was a big book in the late 60s. And so he was, obviously that would have been a laugh line, but sometimes I think those rhyme schemes are tyrannical. And I know that when I go to the theater and I hear English rhyme in new translations or new adaptations, it kind of makes my ear hurt. I might just be stupid, and I'm sorry, but it's exhausting to me. When I think about, a great lyric in a song, say a Sondheim song or something like that, you love those rhymes, but then you have the book scene to kind of rest for a bit. So, I feel like I'm on a horse that just won't give up when it's rhyme, rhyme, rhyme.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know to compare it to the Alexandrian because I don't speak French, but it must be different just because there's a different number of syllables, right? I mean, part of it is, in Shakespeare and in Elizabethan and Jacobean plays, we are used to rhymed couplets being kind of the bell that rings at the end of a scene. It's rare. It's very rare that there's a lot of rhyme in a Shakespearean play. Although *Midsummer Night's Dream* is the exception that's going to prove that rule. There's a lot of rhyme in *Midsummer*. Romeo and Juliet. So the earlier romances and comedies have a lot more than the later plays. And we should, since we're talking about this, what do you all think about Richard Wilbur in that regard, Jeffrey or Mirabelle?
I always admired
gold
Richard
standard,
Wilbur,
right?
Terrifically. But I have to admit, I can't remember how often I've seen a Richard Wilbur translation on stage. It is kind of a gold standard, but I don't know. Maybe it's a gold standard from a particular period. I would say one thing about rhythm. Mark Lynn-Baker had read one of the earlier drafts, and he'd said, "Can we have more of the back and forth,
right,
the way Molière had done it?" I trimmed and compressed things, and I guess to me it's kind of the equivalent of American or British music hall vaudeville, where it's like, "I'm going to send her to a convent. You're going to send her to a convent? Yes, I'm going to send her to a convent. No, you won't send her to a convent."
It's the Marx Brothers.
So Mark, said, we really should do that stuff because that's what Molière does. So I put a lot of that stuff back that I'd originally cut. Sometimes I'm too brusque about those things, but I think he's right. It also is about relationship because most of those exchanges are between Argonne and Toinette, and it shows that they are accustomed to talking this way. The two of them. There's a certain a familiarity.
It's like Shakespeare's Stickamithia. It's like the shared lines. Yeah.
I was thinking about who's on first, but you want to go to Stickamithia? Sure.
Sure. Mirabelle, tell me if I'm wrong. Oh, sorry, Mirabelle. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure from the French that I used to take in high school and a little bit in college, that it's because of the way that verbs translate. It's a heck of a lot easier to rhyme in French than it is in English. Like it's less. It feels like everything ends with an A sound. Like if you correct me if I'm being immensely reductive, but I do have that memory of the language. So I've always sometimes felt like we're really forcing ourselves sometimes in the English to accomplish quite that level of rhyming couplet.
Yes, I mean, I also think that, there are way more verbs in English and way more nouns in French. So when you guys have one verb to describe something, we usually use nouns and adjectives. So the way the language works is different. And also, iambic pentameter is based on the rhythm, the actual rhythm of the English language, right? Taram, taram. It actually follows closely how the not the echoes, the accents, right, that are natural to the English language. In France, we don't have accents. When we speak, it's an unaccented language, and there is an accent, but it's very, very slight, and you barely hear it. So in a verse, it's not so much the accents within words that you look for, but the grammatical structure and the rhyme that creates this sense of rhythm and echo. So it's created by various means. And so that's why it becomes as Jeffrey was saying, it becomes very constricted because just the way that the languages work, that's it, and if you, it can't be replicated exactly. So I think it's, getting closer to a sense of verse by using other means usually allows for more flexibility. Now, there are some plays in which the whole thing is about having the upper class characters speaking in verse, whereas the low class characters are speaking in prose. And so in that case, then you should really try to make distinction, because there is something there at stake here. But in this play, everyone is speaking the same prose, whether it's Toinette or whether it's Argan. And so that's not where the difference is. The difference here is how much jargon people use, really, right? And so I think there's the actual rhythm of the comedy, but then in linguistic differences, it's really about how much jargon, how much fake Latin, or how much fake legalese there is. And that's what really informs how the characters speak. And so that's, I think, that's the main thing. I think that and that Jeffrey did very well in running this version. That's what makes each character unique.
Well, and luckily we didn't choose one of those rhyme couplet plays for this, but maybe next time. But I'm curious. I know Molière wrote a lot of plays, a lot more than we know in English. But I can think of the 4 or 5 really well-known ones off the top, in terms of The Misanthrope and Tartuffe and Invalid. But how many, just off the top of your head, Mirabelle, how many of the comedies are in rhyme and how many are in prose? Are the vast majority of them in prose or verse, or is it about half and half?
That is a very good question. I don't know. I can look it up.
I'm curious if Molière really, it does.
I don't know. I can find. That's a very good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's for sure everything that's sung is rhymed.
Right.
So every time there's music and singing, it's always rhymed. But for the rest, I do not know. That's a good thing to look up and do some research about.
One of the things, if I can jump in, that we struggled a little bit, at least at ground level, was the attitude towards doctors post-pandemic. Because the attitude towards doctors in the play, at least by, what's his name? Is it Berald?
Berald. Sorry,
Berald,
yes.
And his attitude is kind of like, don't worry about doctors so much. Just be healthy, breathe, go in the country. Don't call the doctor all the time. And we're all. I'm going to assume this. We're vaguely left of center here. And we probably are the kind of people who we got our vaccinations and we put our masks on and everything. And if our relatives said, "Hey, there's no such thing as COVID or blah blah blah," we argued and said science is real. So I felt like, geez, some of the plays' attitude is a hard one to sell in 2024. And I just, Mirabelle, anybody. I thought, well, you can still make fun of doctors, but I think in a weird way, we're kind of sensitive to the idea of beating up on people who are supposed to be saving our lives over the last 3 or 4 years.
If I can step in on because I have less experience with the play than everyone here, so I only received it really that one time with the adaptation, and because of the way he goes after the doctors he goes after, I didn't really think of those doctors as the doctors who you see in hospitals who are groups of established. I actually saw them as the ones who went, "Hey, how about you try this horse steroid?" Right? Like I actually saw them as the other side, the quacks, the ones who are peddling some miracle cure to make money, who were also there doing that. So I don't know if I was the only person who heard it that way. I don't know if that affects like how one might consider setting it or at least trying to lean it that way to make sure that we know which ones we're making fun of. But it felt to me like it was those ones who are also very present.
I think in Molière, for Molière, there was no such distinction. It was pretty much old. But what he's saying is, first of all, his mother died when he was 10, and I think seeing doctors trying to save his mom and completely failing was something that really durably affected him. And he lost many children. This was a time when death was around you, and it was quote unquote normal to see people die that were very close to you. So if you think of doctors as people who can prevent death, then of course for Molière, they're quacks, because none of them really can do that. Now, we can say today medicine has made some progress, and so we have been able to have doctors prevent many deaths. And so maybe today we can make that distinction. And of course, one of the things that Molière also makes fun of is the kind of doctors who only treat people according to how the ancients were treating people. He makes this distinction with Thomas Diafoirus and his son. So these are doctors that explicitly will only follow the lead on the orders of the ancient, right? So they will only take cures that were prescribed by the Greeks or by the old guard. And one of the things that he attacks, there was this new idea of blood circulation at the time, and this was something that was very much new for science. And so then there were some of the doctors that were saying, yes, actually blood circulates in the body and that's how it works. And some of them are like, no, the ancients did not know that and this did not exist. And and Thomas Diafoirus' son is actually, he's actually writing a dissertation on disproving the blood circulation. So I think a lot of what Molière goes against also is backwards doctors who do not keep up with current discoveries and who refuse to take in the advances of medicine. And I think in that respect, he's making a distinction between doctors who are willing to explore, take in new ideas and try modern remedies, as opposed to doctors who are set in their ways and will only do things that have been done so far, even if they actually prove completely useless.
Right. That's really helpful. And Nathan, your comment as well. I would only just add that I think that the doctors in this play, at least as they've come to us now in the adaptation, definitely feel like they're all on the make. and so you don't feel any chagrin at them being made fun of or having or losing out on the make. And also we have in Argonne a character who we haven't talked much about this, but he's addicted to doctors, and so a lot of the fun is had at the expense of Argonne, who seems not to be ill. And I know we're almost out of time here together, but I did want to ask about the title and that part of the plot device, and that we have a character who maybe you could literally translate it for us, Mirabelle, who seems to want a doctor for every possible thing, and that seems to me in the play more of what's being made fun of than doctors themselves.
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, because definitely what Molière attacks is doctors who speak Latin and Greek, but who have no idea how to cure diseases, really.
Right.
And that's really one thing that bothers him a lot.
Okay.
But to answer your question about the title, so it's invalid is actually not really what the French word is. Malade means sick as an adjective, but it can also be used as a noun. Un malade is a sick person, right? And so le malade imaginaire is a man who imagines himself to be sick, really. That's the actual title of the play. It doesn't a bit long for a play, which is why I think we got translated as The Imaginary Invalid, because it actually keeps up with the amount of time, amount of words and time that the French title is. But yes, it would really be it's someone who imagines himself to be sick and who actually isn't.
Yeah, we've gone back and forth about the title a bit, because The Imaginary Invalid is a famous title. But is there something else that would say, well, it's the same play, but it's a different perspective? So we've batted some things around, but I don't know that we've come to anything that we really love.
I mean, you could go with Imaginary Patient, but I mean, patient seems very medical.
Yeah.
And we also do have that word, le patient, but it's not that. So it is very hard. I can see why it's
The man who would be sick.
Howard just offered in the chat the same thing I was going to, and I think some people do use this as the title of the play as the hypochondriac.
Yeah, but I think hypochondriac is there is the term hypochondriac that exists in French, and Molière did not choose it as a title. But also, isn't it someone who is afraid of being sick, who fears getting sick, as opposed to
That's true.
imagining himself to be sick? I think there's a slight difference here.
And the word imaginary is such a shame to lose. That's such a great
right
word.
Because I think there's a lot about it's all about how you see yourself, right? I mean, I think this is part of what they're trying to burst Aragon's bubble. Is like, this is how you see yourself, but this is not what reality is. It's all in your head, or it's all something that you created to protect yourself.
And Anne Clark offers the pretend invalid, but he's not pretending. He thinks he's sick. It sounds then like he's faking it. Like he's purposefully faking it to get something as opposed to tricking his own mind.
And we wrestle with the word invalid because, of course, that's not true to the play at all. The character's not pretending to be an invalid, as we understand the term.
And he's running around. He's like, he's very active.
I throw this anecdote. My grandmother was very much, I would call, an invalid for most of the time I knew her. You had to help her out of chairs, help her into bed, help her out of bed. And she'd had a stroke in her late 50s. And yet sometimes my grandfather would get her pills mixed up, and she was suddenly able to get out of her chair and stride across her. It's like, you've not physically been able to do this since 1958. And yet there she was doing all these things that you said, wow, she doesn't do this when she's on her proper medications. I don't know quite what to say about that, but the body is saying one thing and the mind is saying something else.
Anne Clark does bring up, it took me a second to understand what she was saying. Now I think she may be arguing for the title to be the invalid. Invalid as in not true, invalid. Which is a fun pun. I give props for the pun. I'm not sure it gets us out of the way of that word being a little iffy, but it is fun.
I still think the title should be "He's Not Sick" with an exclamation point.
A musical.
We do have one question. From Ray Leslie. I know all of us are familiar with the Learned Ladies, but just a really quick, what are our opinions on that play? Because Ray asked. What's our 10-second review of the Learned Ladies for each of us?
I'm not I don't know it. I've never read it, so I have no opinion.
I've read it, and I'd love to let Mirabelle speak first as the most learned lady here.
Well, I mean, I think Molière makes fun of these women who pretend to be super intelligent and who make who makes themselves better than they actually are. And I think that is a little bit the same way that he's poking fun at doctors who pretend to be much better than they are at curing people. So I think that would be the link between the two. It is also one of the, very famous play in France, and it gets performed a lot. Quite funny. It's also very cruel.
Yes, I was just going to say the last time I read it, Mirabelle, and I know we are short on time, but the reason I read it, I appreciated it, I understood it, I thought it was amusing, but I also thought it was terribly dated in its treatment of gender and kind of surprisingly distasteful. And I thought, well, I didn't know if that was the translation or if that was the base material.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I haven't seen it in a while. I should read it, but it's true that it is. There's. Again, I think this play is very, as you say, dated in as much as it is making fun of a very specific trend that was going on at the time that I don't know is going on in quite the same way today. So
I definitely think a woman should adapt it, don't you?
Yes, I agree. Making fun of women who want to be smarter didn't seem particularly
right. But I mean, also there is also again in such plays that he's also making fun of the men who then try to get who try to seduce the women who want to. So I think it's again it's not only the women who get made fun of. I think pretty much everyone. But yes, I think definitely this play would need to be reworked and adapted.
I actually performed in an adaptation by a woman a long time ago, and they did a decent job of that, of like making the women who were the learned ladies utterly absurd, right? Like to such a point of absurdity that it no longer feels kind of misogynistic to make fun of them because it's taken to such an extreme. And then they upped the maid and the daughter, who are the ones who are sane, and really made them the power players of the ones who sort of save the day, and took away their, you shouldn't do this, it's just you should do it right. So they were able to kind of flip that around. I personally think the servants are the best part. But yes. Great. We are getting near. We've had a wonderful and dense 1 hour, and we will all be meeting together again after the reading for more conversation. Is there any, we seem to be out of questions. Are there any other final comments or thoughts that any of you have before we let the play speak for itself and then we speak for it again?
I just look forward to seeing all of you in person in the flesh a week from now.
Yes.
And I mean, I will say I must say we have a fantastic cast reading this terrific adaptation. We not just Annalee Ashford, but also Jordan Boatman, Will Brill, Arnie Burton, Kelly Curran, Mark Lynn Baker, Ryan McCartan, and Lorenzo Pisoni. I mean, it's a cast of wonderful actors and super clowns, really funny people, some of whom sing wonderfully also, and you'll get to hear some of that. So I hope you all will join us on the reading on Monday night, and I think it's also live streamed and available for 6 days or something following that, right, Nathan?
Correct, yes. It'll be available for almost exactly 6 days after it goes up. So we hope to see you live, but if you can't join us live, we hope that you can see us online. And so thank you, Jesse, Mirabelle, and Jeffrey. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming up next for Red Bull after Imaginary Invalid. But I won't make you stick around for that. So I'll take you off. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
Bye all. And then everybody online, thank you for sharing this time with us tonight. I hope that we see you on Monday or that you see us online. And please do check out, we have a very exciting reading of Antony and Cleopatra coming up on March 25th, starring John Douglas Thompson and another amazing cast. And then starting in the spring on April 15th and running through May 16th, we are doing our 20th anniversary festival, which has, I think, 9 different titles, ranging from one-day readings to 2-week-long workshops starring Santino Fontana, Patrick Page, Chuck Wudiawuji, Kelly Curran, Rebecca Hall. There are more, Beth Marvel, and onward, Jacob Ming Trent. So do check that out and get your tickets now. And we hope to see you at many other events. And if you want to support Red Bull Theater and get nice discounts on all of your tickets, please consider becoming a friend of Red Bull Theater. For a $50 donation, you'll get lots of access to early ticket sales and discounts, etc. So we hope that you will continue to be a part of the Red Bull family. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for this seminar and talk on The Imaginary Invalid. Have a wonderful night.